Good morning and welcome to the April 7th meeting for the Policy and Innovation Committee for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Would you please stand and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Good morning. Director Andreotta? Chapdelaine?
Here.
Gallardo?
Here.
Kennedy? McCully?
Here.
Rodriguez absent. Schaefer?
Here.
Soon?
Here.
Veerkamp?
Here.
Vice Chair Vega?
Here.
And Chair Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Thank you.
Let the record show that we do have a quorum for the purposes of today's meeting. Next item on the agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the committee on an item that's not scheduled on the agenda. We can't take action on said items tonight, but we can certainly refer them to staff for future consideration. I have one individual here for regular public comment. David Schwagel, would you like to come on up?
All right, we're good. All right. Greetings, SACOG Policy and Innovation Committee. My name is David Schwegel, speaking on innovations in light rail, high-speed rail, and economic stimulation. First, light rail. Did you know that the entire phase 1 of the Sacramento light rail system was built for less money than a single interchange in Walnut Creek? That correlates to bang for the buck. However, between 2011 and 2018, Sacramento light rail experienced the nation's largest ridership drop. However, just in the past year, new light rail vehicles have come online and 15-minute service was implemented to Folsom. Both are game changers for me. The LAO's funding gap estimate of $7 billion for high-speed rail does not account for the forthcoming clawback of $4.1 billion from the federal government and the remaining work on the 3 construction packages. Once you factor in these 2 items, it correlates to a funding gap of $12 billion likely to kill the project. 2 of the 3 design builder teams took a profit-centered approach versus a taxpayer-centered approach, which cost the California taxpayers $9 billion, or the cost of building the entire Merced to Sacramento section, including a tunnel beneath downtown Sacramento to reach Sacramento Valley Station. This section is the quickest and most direct path to ridership revenue, but under the taxpayer-centered approach, the design builders would have required the authority to acquire 100% of the right-of-way first before design build activities could commence for a total cost of around $1.5 billion for each of the 2 construction packages based on the engineer's estimate calculated by the authority. However, under the profit center approach, which took place, the design builders sued the authority for not being fast enough with their notice to proceed and then submitted numerous change orders associated with right-of-way acquisition for a total cost of $6 billion. This was even though they only bid the construction package at $1 billion. Now I'm working with the offices of Congressman Kevin Kiley, the Secretary of State's Office, the Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists, and all 121 members of the state legislature to get their business licenses revoked permanently. Finally, the numerous office buildings I'm seeing on US 50 between Folsom and downtown that are vacant is really disturbing because each one of those office buildings represents hundreds of people out of work. And we export 120,000 workers every day, and I used to be one of them. We rank at the bottom of the nation in retaining our college grads, in stark contrast to Fresno, which has an 82% retention rate. Get our residents to care about our bleak economy. A Greater Phoenix Competitors Forum attracts around 1,500 attenders, in stark contrast to Sacramento, which
30
only attracts
seconds.
around 200. How many time? Okay, so without jobs, college degrees become meaningless, and gangs and drugs on Mac Road become more attractive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate that. Are there any other public comments at this time?
There's no other public comment.
All right, seeing no further public comments, I will close public comment and move on to our consent agenda. We have just one item on the consent agenda. Are there any questions or concerns with regards to the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, I wasn't here that week, so I just abstained.
Okay. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
There's no public comment.
Hearing none. Committee members, what's your pleasure with regards to the consent agenda?
I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. And let the record show the motion has been adopted unanimously. Moving on to action items with one abstention. I apologize, Director Sun. Yes. So the record shall be corrected. Moving on to the action items, we have the first item is to approve amendment number 2 to the budget and overall work program for fiscal year 24-25. Loretta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. The board adopted the budget and overall work program for fiscal year 2024-25 in May 2024, and then approved the amendment number 1 to the budget in October 2024. Caltrans issues the final fiscal year formula allocations and required the programming of the final allocation with a formal amendment by May 1st. So staff is recommending that the Policy and Innovation Committee recommend that the board approve the amendment number 2 to the budget and OWP for fiscal year 2024-25 and authorize the submittal to Caltrans and federal agency. The amendment number 2 to the budget includes revenue adjustment, fund balance adjustment, and also staff hours reallocations. The amendment number 2 includes the following revenue adjustment. This includes a reduction of approximately $76,000 in federal formula funds, and also we include a reduction of approximately $327,000 in TDA planning and administration fees due to the revised sales tax revenue forecast from Sacramento County. And finally, also a reduction of approximately $700,000 to multi-year grants and programs to align with the current year fiscal year's expenditures. This includes the SB 125 funds, CARTA support, race grant, and carbon reduction programs. The revenue for these programs are deferred to fiscal year 2025-26. Secondly, the amendment number 2 includes reduction in the use of fund balance. This includes SIGCOG managed fund of $900,000. This is due to the expected loan repayment and also interest income estimated for the current fiscal year. It also includes the reduce of fund balance of approximately $820,000, resulted in a saving of $382,000 and a carryover of expenses into fiscal year 25-26 of $434,000. Lastly, the amendment number 2 also includes staff hour reallocation to reflect allocations of hour based on expected utilization by projects. So in summary, amendment number 2 to the budget and OWP for fiscal year 2024-25 reflects a total revenue of approximately $41.2 million and use of reserve funds of $3.1 million and also unassigned fund balance of $83,000 from the originally approved $900,000. Total expenditure is approximately $39.9 million, a decrease of $1.7 million or 4% comparing to the budget number 1. Attached to the staff item or budget schedule reflecting the changes in amendment number 2 compared to amendment number 1. Attachment A shows the changes in the overall revenue by funding source. Attachment B through attachment E provide a summary of revenue and expenditures and how revenue and expenditures are allocated across SIGCOG work plan activities. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Loretta. Committee members, are there any questions? Seeing none, any public comment on this item? I know I
There's
don't
no
have-
public comment.
Thank you very much. All right, bringing this back to the committee. There are no questions. Any further comments? With that said, I'd like to have a motion, please.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Let the record show the motion has been adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item. This is to adopt the final budget and overall work program for fiscal year 25-26. Loretta, this is yours again.
Thank you. So the final budget for an overall work program for fiscal year 2025-26 are ready for board actions. So this morning, staff is going to briefly highlight the comments received from Caltrans and federal agency on the budget and OWP documents, and then talk about the final budget and OWP for fiscal year 2025-26. And lastly, a recommendation on the operating reserve. So before I go into the comments and the final budgets, I just want to quickly highlight the timeline in terms of the development of the budget and the OWP document. So back in February, staff submitted a draft to Caltrans and federal agency for review and comment. And then at the March board meeting, the board released the draft budget and OWP for public comments. And then in April, staff will bring the final budgets for board adoption and also submit it to Caltrans and federal agencies for final approval and to begin expenditures for the fiscal year starting July 1st, 2025. So staff has received comments back from the federal agency and Caltrans. There's no fiscal impact to the budgets. There were just some minor updates required to the OWP to the documents, which includes some updates to project description and deliverables, and then clarification on some required cash match on certain discretionary grant and some other minor updates to the document. Because staff just received those comments last week, so it didn't have time to incorporate it into the document that is presented to the policy innovation. So those comments were reflected in the final document that will be going to the board next next week. Sorry. So for the final budget and OWP for fiscal year 2025-26, there was no change from the draft budget that was presented to the board in March. So total revenue projected for the fiscal year reflects approximately 47.8 million and use of reserve funds of approximately 1.4 million. And just a quick overview. So this includes the SACOG Managed Fund used for the discretionary race grant match and also the community design grants, and also includes 225,000 of board and advocacy reserve, and then additional 225,000 from the pension trust to cover the increase in the annual unfunded pension liability. And lastly is the 434,000 of expenditures that are carried over from the current fiscal year. So total expenditure for the fiscal year is projected to be approximately 41.2 million. Here, just a quick highlight and overview of the total revenue for the fiscal year. Again, total revenue is approximately 47.8 million and use of fund balance of approximately 1.4 million, which reflect a net increase of 6.2 million compared to the current fiscal year. This is mainly due to the past due RCN and REAP2 Green Means Go funding. As you can see from the chart here, federal revenue makes up 46% of the total revenue, and this includes the federal formula funds, the RCN past due grant, and some of the other discretionary grants. State revenue makes up 40% of the total budget revenue, and this is mainly the REAP2 Green Means Go past due funding. And then lastly, local and other revenue funding makes up the remaining 14%. Here's a summary of all the expenditures projected for the fiscal year, totaling 49.2 million, which includes approximately 28% of staff and fringe benefit costs, consulting costs 10%, and then past due costs, as I noted earlier, makes up 54% of the total budgets. And the remaining 8% represent about 3.8 million, which include operating expenses and some other miscellaneous costs. So last month, the board had asked about SACOG operating policy. So I just want to kind of briefly highlight some of those today. So currently, the SACOG has a policy, called for a policy of 3-month operating reserve, which is approximately about 5.6 million based on the operating forecast that we did in last year. And as a follow-up, staff reviewed the fund policy guidelines from the Government Financial Officer Association, also in short just GFOA, which provide recommendation for public agency in the United States and Canada. The GFOA recommends that public agencies should take a risk-based approach to establishing reserve. Because SACOG has a lower risk profile than a city or county on both the expenditures and revenue side, because most of SACOG fundings are formula-based, and then past due costs and consulting costs can be canceled or suspended if there is no revenue, corresponding revenue. As such, the recommended operating reserve is 16.6% of the budget based on GFOA guidelines. Additionally, as you heard from that previous item, staff completed the amendment for the current fiscal year, which resulted in a saving of approximately $380,000 in use of the unassigned fund balance. So with that, staff is recommending that assigning $500,000 from the unassigned fund balance to the operating reserve. The current balance is 2.1 million or 2,125,000. With the increase of 500,000, this will bring the balance to 2,625,000. Based on the SACOG policy, this will be approximately about 47% funded and 71% funded based on the GFOA guidelines. Staff will update the forecast in the fall and bring back recommendations on any changes to the fund balance policy so that it is aligned with the GFOA guidelines and also SACOG operation needs. With that, staff is recommending that the Policy and Innovation Committee recommend that the board adopt the final budget and the overall program for fiscal year 2025-26, and also approve assigning $500,000 from the unassigned fund balance to the operating reserve. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your report. So just to confirm, staff would be bringing back a discussion for the policy reserve in the fall. Is that what you stated?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, and for the purposes of today, adding the $500,000 would bring us up to 47% of that reserve. So for
Based on
3
the
months.
current fund policy. Yes.
Okay, so we wouldn't be at 3 months reserve. We would be at how many months reserve with that?
I would say that is possibly about a month and a half based on the projected forecast that we did last year.
Okay, so,
And then if it's based on the GFOA guidelines, that is about 71% funded.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to open this up for questions and discussions before I say anything further. Yes, Director.
Thank you, Chair. So when we talk about percentages of the 17%, we're talking about 47% of the 17%. That's where you really kind of lose people. And I would say that if you're going to say it in that respect, do it exactly like you said. We like to have 3 months, but we're only going to have about 6 weeks. It's a lot more clear. So much easier for me to explain to people that 47 of 17 or 16% is really math doesn't work for me. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
thank you. And I heard you allude to a little bit, but maybe you could explain why the distinction between this type of organization and our regular cities and counties in terms of dependencies on revenue and risk.
Yeah, so basically SACOG is mostly federal federally funded, right? So it's all based on formula funding, most of the funding that SACOG receive versus the cities that where there could be emergency that would needs to be covered. And in SACOG, mostly our work is mainly performing services, technical assistant, and consulting work, right? So in a sense, there's not really a lot of emergency things that could happen except that, any changes to the formula funding that SACOG receive.
Just to tease that a little bit more, because there's so much uncertainty at the federal level, you're actually talking about congressional authorizations that send the money down, not through the executive branch deciding.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Good points. Thank you. Further questions or comments? I don't have a card, but is there any public comment on this item, Madam Clerk?
There's no public comment.
Okay. As we know, there are 2 recommendations that staff are bringing forward to us at this time. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Let the record show the motion has been adopted unanimously, and we look forward to addressing that policy in the fall. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next item on the action would be item 4, authorizing the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority Loan and Staffing Services Agreement. Eric, this one's yours.
Yes, thank you. So this item came before you in draft form last month, and so I'm back with the actual terms of the loan agreement as well as a staffing services agreement. So maybe I'll start with the staffing service agreement, which is relatively straightforward. So just to recap, SACOG is one of the original members of this new Joint Powers Authority, CARTA, the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority. SACOG has been doing all of the staffing services for CARTA previously. We are going to transition out starting in the first part of calendar year 26 to have a consultant effectively serve as the project manager for the process. SACOG is going to reduce its role in CARTA activities to largely be supportive. And so with that, we just want to be really clear what SACOG is responsible for, what CARTA and their consultants are responsible for, so that over time, as CARTA hires staff, right, it's clear that they are responsible for overseeing their staff and their expenditures, and SACOG provides whatever level of support we agree to. And so the staffing services agreement is just an administrative service agreement between the two entities saying, we'll work together to plan things. And then kind of once we set a plan of who's responsible for what, we'll stick to that plan. So that's the first item in the attachment here. The second piece of the item is the loan agreement. And so what we've done in consultation with our legal counsel is drafted an amendment to our amended and restated loan agreement, so that SACOG last year did an initial $1.3 million loan. We're proposing to do a second $1.3 million loan. So really kind of blending those together into one single legal document and then having two promissory notes. I will flag that one recommendation that's come forward through the CARTA, the staff from SACOG that are staffing CARTA, is to extend the repayment of that from 2028 to 2030 for the initial repayment, and then have that go out from that point forward. Reason being, one, that's still the anticipated beginning of revenue service for CARTA, but there's also a lot of other staff and largely startup costs that are going to be happening in that same time period. And so it just gives a little bit more flexibility. So SACOG would still retain the earnings interest over that period, but would give CARTA some flexibility on when it would have to start the repayments to that loan. So other than that, there's no other changes in the terms of the loan. It's a rolling loan based on the Sacramento County Pooled Investment Fund, which is where SACOG would otherwise have this money invested. With that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. So one legal document, two promissory notes, and the request to push out repayment to 2030. And you said the earnings interest would remain the same for that entire period. And that earnings interest would fluctuate, correct?
That's correct.
So it's going to ebb and flow. It's just going to extend it out more. So there will be more to pay back, obviously, but okay, thank you. Questions or comments from the committee?
I have one question.
Yes.
Just for clarification, did you say that SACOG will start transitioning out of providing staffing in fiscal year 26? Is that what you said, or?
Actually, calendar year.
Calendar year.
So yeah,
Okay.
so right now Kathleen Hanley on our staff has essentially been the project manager. And so about January, February of 2026,
Okay,
we're looking to have a consultant on board.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on this item? Moving right along. Madam Clerk, any public comment on item 4?
There's no public comment.
All right, I'll bring this back to the committee. And is there a motion?
So moved.
The recommendations for staff?
recommendation.
Okay. It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Let the record show the motion has been adopted unanimously. That concludes our action items for today. We're going to move into information, and the first is an advocacy update.
All right, good morning, Renee DeVere, OPM for staff. So today we're gonna have 2 updates as usual. I'll kick it off and then we'll have Jason speak, and then we're gonna have Bless from our staff come up as well as Chris. So little two-part item. Before I hand it over to Jason, just do a little bit of framing. So back in February and March, James as well as Christina were back in DC policy conferences. A lot of the dialogue that you're hearing back there was related to the freeze on federal funds, as well as the reauthorization of the transportation bill that's coming up. One of the items that we developed and I mentioned last time is that we started collecting projects that we knew, and these are discretionary projects that you applied for, that were part of this freeze or review that Jason's gonna go over a little bit more. That list, a snapshot, is $76.8 million. So that's kind of what we're looking and tracking. as we go into that. And then Secretary Duffy did give a presentation or presented at the Environmental Public Works Committee last week, a little bit on reauthorization. So I know that Jason's going to get into that a little bit. So I will hand it over to Jason to do the deep dive on the details.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Just a very quick, I think, update, a handful of things that have occurred since we've last spoken. First and foremost, Congress passed a budget for the rest of fiscal year 2025. That budget is what's known as a continuing resolution, which essentially means that funding that the same funding levels that were previously approved continue forward. The good news is with transportation funding, since so much of the formula dollars and so much of the money that SACOG relies on and our partners rely on come through formulas, those formulas are set in stone. And will continue. So it is effectively for transportation. Everything is good. The year to year will continue. There were no disruptions. What I will say is that there was some disappointment within Democrats who were hoping to clarify and establish a little more vocally opposition to things that the Trump administration was doing with federal funding, with their reviews of specific projects that have been previously awarded. What I will say there is that many of the projects that had been put on pause and set for review, many of them are now being freed up. We're hearing from stakeholders around the state and around the country that grants that were in the process of quote unquote being reviewed are now progressing and moving forward, and that we should expect that to continue over the coming days, weeks, and months. Effectively, there have been some stories and some discussions that certain projects were reviewed and the stakeholder were asked to make minor adjustments to the work scope of work and the work program. But by and large, we continue to see the threat of these funding freezes, and then the reality is that a lot of the funding does move forward. We will continue to monitor it. It's a very fluid situation that changes almost daily. As Renee mentioned, last week, Secretary Duffy testified before the Environment and Public Works Committee. A lot of the discussion prior to that hearing was that he was going to have his feet sort of put to the fire in terms of, the grants and what was moving forward there. He addressed that in the hearing and mentioned that the funding would continue to flow. So I think some of the projects that we are keeping our eye on locally, we're certainly keeping our delegation aware of what's going on, and certainly, again, as the situation is fluid and almost unprecedented, we will continue to sort of work with staff and make sure that any of the projects and programs that have been awarded will get awarded. The final thing I'll say is that the final two things I'll say about the freezes is that at this point, most of the focus continues to be on competitive grant programs, not the formula dollars, which make up a vast majority of the money that SACOG and our partners receive. At this point, most of the focus, but the fear is still out there. The fear still kind of exists, but there is no reason to believe, from what we have seen, that the formula dollars are in any imminent danger. That is not to say we should not keep an eye on them, and we won't keep an eye on them, or that we won't keep an eye on them, but that at this point, most of the focus have been on individual competitive grant dollars, which is positive. To that end, the next transportation bill is just a little over a year away. The current bill, IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, however you want to phrase it, expires at the end of this fiscal year. And we expect that legislation will begin being worked on in earnest this summer. Last week, the days are sort of blurring into one another. I believe it was Monday. The House Environment and Public Works, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee opened up a portal asking stakeholders, which include everything from private sector companies to entities like SACOG, for ideas on what a transportation bill should look like moving forward. Chairman of the committee, Sam Graves of Missouri, and the ranking member, Rick Larson, have pledged three things about this bill. They have pledged to work together in a bipartisan manner. They have pledged to have it be a rank and file, aka a member-driven bill. And they've pledged to return to a traditional surface transportation bill. So this will not be a reauthorization of the entire IIJA, but they will focus on highways, transit, and hopefully to some extent passenger rail. Currently, Kevin Kiley, Congressman Kiley, sits on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. We are in contact with that office and working with them regarding SACOG's priorities, both locally in terms of things that we're working to accomplish related to Green Means Go, et cetera, as well as the broader vision of what a transportation bill should look like. Other Bay Area members on the committee include Jared Huffman from the North Bay, Congressman DeSaulnier from Contra Costa, and then Congressman Garamendi, who and prior to redistricting certainly served a great portion of SACOG and is very familiar with our community, with your community. So that portal is opening up. We will be taking our recommendations and submitting them to that portal. And that will be a large part of the cap to cap trip is talking about some of those priorities in the meetings we have with the delegation. With that said, Devin, my colleague Devin Barnhart hopped on. I've covered the appropriations, the freeze and reauthorization. I don't know, Renee or Devin, if there's anything else that you would like us to cover.
Devin,
You're on mute, Devin.
Apologies. I just want to flag one other thing that there's a lot of work being done by the national associations in terms of supporting MPOs. And so there's various reports planned from people that will be coming out, all that are very supportive in nature, that regions are a really critical, important part of the transportation system, that MPOs in particular should continue and grow that role. And so just to flag a couple, one, there's that we've been working on around making sure that the good funding that was included in the IIJA, even though not all of that funding is likely to continue, but the funding that helps schools and regions to really accomplish their goals, hopefully that funding will continue to be included. And so there's a report showing that if we don't continue some higher level of funding, that regions and locals will miss out on some of that critical funding. So that report is in the works. That's AMPO's working on that with a host of other locally driven organizations. There are others highlighting the need for new ways to get monies to regions. And so these aren't congressional documents. These are recommendations essentially to Congress. And so it's all just good news that there's sort of this like groundswell that we should be investing in infrastructure. This a good bill should move forward, and that region should be a really big part of it.
The last thing I'll mention just real quickly is the role that quite frankly, I think SACOG plays in being a leader in this. You know, I think often when Congress and when you know, stakeholders look at trying to promote something, they look to those who are doing it right. And I just want to note that SACOG is often brought in. James was in town for a NERC NAMPO conference and spoke at a League of Cities meeting. You know, so SACOG is in many ways the example that other MPOs look to, and in many ways what Congress would like to see around the nation. Some of the work that other MPOs they would like them to do. So I'd be remiss if I did not mention that that fact. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you have additional information, Jason, or?
No, I believe that's it. I don't know if there's any questions or Renee, if there's anything that I have not that we have not covered. I think we've covered everything we talked about.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to committee members. Yes.
Yeah.
Jason. I was just wondering if anything had changed in terms of what sentiments, what choice of words we should talk about when we go back to cap to cap.
Yeah, I still think that there is a need, sort of we should make a decoder ring, right? In terms of the safe words that can be used. I do believe at this point there is still a focus on those words. I mean, just in terms of grant submissions and grants that are made available, they just released the Safe Streets for All program for FY25. And the irony is that the grant program really hasn't changed at all. What is eligible, and this is an example, I use this as an example, what is eligible, what the focus is. Like, I think there were those, myself and I want to say Devin included, who thought, oh my God, what are we going to do with this great program that so many communities have enjoyed? And you read it, and literally it's almost the exact same notice of funding, but it's almost like they went through the document and pressed Shift F7 to look at synonyms to find a different way to describe certain things. So yes, I would say, here, at least when talking to Republicans and talking to the administration, focus on those elements that you think would appeal to that crowd. We were in a meeting with Secretary Dovey's people last week, or I was on a separate issue, and he spoke about innovation and family, and really digging the ground up. And it's one of those things where you look at it and be like, what do you think has happened in transportation in the previous 100 years before you? Like, these are things that obviously you as board members and others think about, are family and innovation and, all of these things. So just recognize that it is a lot of ways word choice. And it's almost comical to avoid climate change. Instead, it's in sustainability, right? Like, so these are things that I'm certain to be cognizant of, especially talking to Republican offices or Republican offices, as well as any of the administration offices. The other thing I will say that I did not mention is right now, DOT and a lot of the agencies we deal with are going through their quote unquote DOGE cuts. So it is very possible that while you all are here in cap to cap, it will be shortly after a significant number of people get effectively laid off and terminated. We do expect to see there will be some short-term impacts. They're talking about closing or consolidating regional offices, consolidating state offices. I think many of you who work in the transit side of the world have seen that already when they got rid of or they let go of probationary employees. I know District 9 was decimated. They spent 2 years hiring up people, in District 9 for the FTA district region, and they all got let go. So, 2 steps forward, 4 steps back type of deal. So I think that is in the process of happening as well. So sorry to sort of go on a non-related question, but I wanted to bring that up.
It's good for us to remember and empathize. Thank you.
Yes, and I think too, innovation, family, economic development, job creation, these are all very important keywords, and we should always keep these in mind when we're back in DC lobbying for our various transportation issues. So, and it is common for our terminology to change when administrations change. It's not unusual. And that's why we are adaptable and flexible, and we will continue to pursue our funding. Very good to hear that we are a model. That's a testament to staff. So thank you, James, and to staff. Very, very impressed to hear that. So thank you. Further questions or comments from the committee at this time?
Chair Dowden Cavillo, just for those of you that are going back to cap, especially if you're on the transportation team, Devin and Jason will actually be giving an update while we are there. So we'll kind of get the latest lay of the land. I think Jason mentioned this in the CR that was finally agreed to when I was back in DC about a month ago. There are no more, what do we call them now? Community.
They're earmarks. You can call them whatever you want.
I was trying to come up with a terminology.
Congressionally,
continuing resolution. So if you
Yes.
had an earmark and you were hoping for it, those got deleted out of the CR, the continued resolution. But then the other thing I would just pass along too is we had a really good meeting with Congressman Kiley's office and went in to meet with his chief of staff, and actually the congressman came in for a few minutes and we had a list of all the transportation grants in our region. And he was very interested, not just in the ones in his district, frankly, but the whole 6-county region, just making sure that those are going to continue to move along. Those are the ones that are actually not signed. So that's right, in terms of all the things we're concerned about are grant agreements that have not yet been signed. And we want to make sure those get signed, and Congressman Kiley, I think, was very positive and, yep, let's do what we can to get those things signed and get the money out the door and make sure it gets to the projects in our region. So just a quick update from my last trip back there.
Thank you very much, James. Any further comments or questions? We do have a public comment on this item. David Schwagel, would you like to come up and address the committee?
Yes, thank you. Congressman Kevin Kiley wants to order an investigation by the FBI on the high-speed rail project. He also wants to starve the project of any future federal funding. Now, keep in mind that the Trump administration back in 2019 successfully clawed back $929 million from the project, despite considerable legal action on the part of California. As mentioned before, the design builders on construction packages 1 and 2 ripped off the taxpayers of California to the tune of $9 billion, and we're also looking at a $12 billion shortfall. As far as high-speed rail is concerned, there is an opportunity for public comment at the High-Speed Rail Authority Board of Directors meeting on May 1st here in Sacramento. Trump sees the high-speed rail project as the worst managed project he has ever seen, and he has seen the worst of the worst, and Duffy uses a lot of expletives to describe the project. The state of California spends $70 billion a year to bankroll the red states. In just 2 years, that's our entire high-speed rail project phases 1 and 2, all the while looping in Redding and Tijuana. And of course, we can pack a whole bunch of undocumented immigrants on the Tijuana originated lines and run them up to the Central Valley to help feed the world. But we spend an awful lot of money simply bankrolling the red states. As mentioned before, the U.S. spends less of its per capita transportation GDP on transportation than many third world countries, per former U.S. Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox. So keep an eye on high-speed rail. It looks like the program is going to be changing significantly very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment? And then we'll go back to
There's no other public comment.
all right, I'll bring this back to the committee. Yes.
I just had a question about I thought we were going to hear a state, are we about to hear a state update? Great. Okay. Thank you.
We're just taking this in pieces. So we're finishing up the federal side and then we'll hear on the state side. All right, so we'll move on to the state update.
Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Bless Shepard. I am the State Government Affairs staff for SACOG. This is my first time addressing the committee. Good morning. And I do so to introduce Chris Lee, who is with Politico Group. He is our state lobbyist. And Chris is going to go over updates and background on SB 375. Excuse me, as you know, SB 375 is the state law that requires SACOG and MPOs to submit an SES, a Sustainable Communities Strategies report to the state that meets the climate target as established by CARB. We hope this is going to be helpful, particularly for our newer members. If there's time, Chris is also going to go over other issues of importance that we flagged for SACOG. And then following that will be James, who is going to give you an update on the big four MPO collaborations on SB 375 reform up to date. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, good morning, Chair and members. Chris Lee with Politico Group. As Beth mentioned, Bless mentioned, good grief. We have a smattering of SB 375 related legislation that's been introduced, and that's the first part of the article that's included in your packet. And there's also some broader conversations happening behind the scenes about potentially more significant structural changes to SB 375, which has been really a discussion that's been ongoing in the legislature, I would say, for the last 5 to 7 years. So in terms of the specific bills that we highlighted for you, the first one, AB 902 by Schultz, this is really taking a mandate that was negotiated last year for cities and counties to include planning related to wildlife movement and crossings in their general plans and conservation elements, and applying it to the sustainable community strategy. There's already some affirmative requirements on Caltrans related to project planning, and so the sponsors here are thinking they're kind of closing a regional gap. A little bit concerned with the specificity of this, as well as just does it portend a trend of let's add all these different bells and whistles to the sustainable community strategy process. Another one, which is a bit of a rehash from last year, is AB 1275, El Wahari, new member from the Los Angeles area. And this kind of is a rehash of AB 1335 from last year, which was really trying to have a very prescriptive approach to how housing needs are accommodated in the sustainable community strategy. We've been coordinating closely with CalCog as well as SACOG staff on that, and are concerned about some forthcoming amendments that might make this one a little bit more difficult. And then finally, I will touch on SB 486 Cabalden. This bill, as discussed in the report, is currently a pretty minor and technical bill that's really getting at the issue of post-secondary educational institutions enrollment factors and the broader sustainable community strategy. And so there's been some litigation out of UC Berkeley about CEQA review of increasing enrollment and the housing needs that are related to that, with some not great outcomes from litigation. And so the idea here is really to align those enrollment projections for basically CSU and UC with the sustainable community strategy. It's done in a little bit of a wonky way in the current bill because, as you all know, the way RENA currently deals with educational institutions and their housing needs is by subtracting that population out from the population projections at the beginning. And then that is the reason why in the housing element process, a lot of dormitory or suite style student housing doesn't count towards RENA, right? So if you talk to the state, that's how they'll say they address this issue. So I think the main thing, my main concern with this bill is harmonizing the housing element piece. If you're going to say, hey, we should also be including changes in enrollment in Sac State and UC Davis when SACOG adopts the SCS. But I think this bill is more important for what it doesn't currently say, which is, will it potentially be a vehicle for a broader set of changes to SB 375? So Senator Cabalden has been telling folks that he's interested in legislation to modernize the SCS process. There's a lot of conversations, as you all are well aware, about big picture issues related to regional planning, such as how do we plan for, how do we mitigate the vehicle miles traveled impacts of land use projects, so new housing development and transportation projects, right? One of the key issues that was discussed a lot and one of the big projects in this region last year was the VMT impacts of the Managed Lanes project on Interstate 80 in Yolo County. All of this happening in the context of a legislative focus on affordability, particularly how do we get out of our own way in terms of permitting and get housing to come online faster and things of that nature. So a lot of the big picture issues, and I could go on, there's cap and trade reauthorization, there's just myriad issues that are wrapped up and really coming to a head in the sustainable community strategy process. And so have had some very detailed conversations on behalf of SACOG with Senator Cabalden's staff, laying out some of the really important issues to SACOG, including eligibility for transportation projects as related to the sustainable community strategy or the alternative planning strategy, which is currently an option under SB 375. So they've been, I'll just say, a little cagey about whether this will be the vehicle, whether the timing of this will come to fruition. I don't think they can amend it in the Senate now. It was just heard in its current form in Senate Housing. So, if I were going to think about what is the strategy here, this vehicle would most likely be amended in the assembly if they were going to include broader SCS changes to it. Not sure that's the strategy I would pursue if I were them, because I think it's a harder bill in the assembly. So getting up some momentum in the Senate would probably be what I would do if I were the author. But in any case, these conversations are happening. There's a lot of interest in all of these issues that are tied up in the SCS. And I think that's a good opportunity for James to talk about what are the MPOs doing to kind of be ready, be at the table, and make sure regional interests are considered in this broader conversation.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So just to round out your state update, and I'm, as Chris mentioned, just going to touch on SB 375, the update. In your packet, you have a 2-pager set of principles. So for the board members that were around last year, and we have a lot of newer board members on this committee, if you remember, the board gave us direction to really use 2025 and 2026 to focus on revisiting, rethinking, and updating SB 375. We have a greenhouse gas target we're required to achieve, a 19% reduction in the plan. We are really close to hitting that, but only just this year. And if you remember, if we don't achieve that, we stand to lose out on critical state transportation funding, right? So that's the direction you've given us. We have started by trying to and convening with what we call the Big Four, the largest 4 MPOs in the state. That's ourselves, the Bay Area MTC, Southern California SCAG, and San Diego SANDAG. Together, the 4 of us represent about 80% of the population. We've spent quite a bit of time aligning ourselves around this 2-pager that's in your packet. I'd be happy to go into those. We've actually spent quite a bit of time on engaging with our state agencies. So we just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the 4 agencies and our executives of the MPOs and numerous state agencies, including the Air Resources Board, California Transportation Commission, Caltrans, and HCD. We are now working with CalCog, our association of all the COGs across the state, to get the other COGs to come on board. I'm heading down to San Joaquin Valley on Thursday to their policy conference, state of all the inland San Joaquin Valley COGs. And then Chris just mentioned the potential opportunity with some of the legislation, including the bill from Senator Cabaldon. But that's really what we've been up to so far, is organizing ourselves around principles, engaging with our state partners, engaging with some of the advocates that are going to be key on this, engaging with some of the industry groups. So far, I think we've laid that groundwork effectively, and now it's a matter of trying to figure out how we can build that coalition and then begin to get some of the things that we want to see into language. So we think we've got about a 2-year window here, this year and next year.
Thank you, James. And I just wanted to reiterate that was the direction of this board to pursue this change. And so we appreciate all the work that you are doing to make that happen. And it is really a regional effort, and appreciate all the outreach you've been doing, meeting with CalCog to get the other COGs online as well as our mega region. So thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. I echo those sentiments and reminders for anybody, well, not reminder, but new information for those who are new to the board. James, I just wanted to ask about, well, I heard Chris, you talking about the senator's office being a little cagey. I'm just wondering, in relations to our framework, have they been willing to adopt those, or is there a lot of conversations around that? And I know the timing has passed. So.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say the timing has passed. I think it's just going to be a question strategically if they pull the trigger and introduce language that has this broader debate. When and where do they do it? The direct response from his staff when I said, is it going to be SB 486, was, well, we have vehicles, right? So that's just kind of tactics and strategy. But I think in terms of the substantive issues, prior to the Big Four document coming out, the conversation that I had with this staff was really high level. Here are fundamental issues with how this has rolled out as we've seen, come to fruition in this region. And then on the very specific issue of the eligibility for SB1 grant funding, they have language in hand and know that that language is very important to this region. So
Okay.
I think because there's so many stakeholders, right? You have environmentalists, environmental justice community, you have the construction industry and labor, you have housing developers, affordable and market rate, and you have local and regional governments. This is a very carefully negotiated, kind of unwieldy negotiation between stakeholders that have a lot of different concerns. And because it's at the intersection of climate and infrastructure and housing affordability, it's even more complex. So I think they're talking with stakeholders from kind of across the spectrum. But I think what the regions are doing, particularly with the two-pager that James laid out, is the most important thing we can be doing right now, talking to the folks who are interested in advancing this debate and making sure that there's as much as possible a united front from the regional governments.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, and I do recognize there is a timing to when to have some of those conversations, so. appreciate
Yeah,
that.
especially in the context of, there have been a lot of bills that didn't pass that sought to extend SB 375, make changes to it, further restrict how you pick projects and align things in the plan. And part of the conversation that I had very frankly with the senator's office was about what I view as some of the pitfalls of that and how it's so important that the regional perspective is part of it. Because the last bill that fell apart on this issue, there was a stakeholder work group, there was a lot of discussion, there were regions putting a lot of things on the table, and then Assemblymember Friedman came out with a bill very late in the process that didn't reflect any of that negotiation, and it stalled, right? So just making sure that the issues that are important to us are well known and vetted and going to be part of the debate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Madam Chair, I do have a question on the informational briefing when it's appropriate.
I have a question for Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Very good, Chris. Thank you. Can you tell me, give me an update on AB 1223?
AB 1223, the Sacramento Transportation Authority.
Correct, yes.
Southside Bill, yes. I can remember numbers from 5 years ago, but not always this month. So that bill has been double referred to the Assembly Local Government Committee and the Assembly Transportation Committee. It's my understanding that it's not set for hearing yet, but there was a set of amendments that I believe represent a compromise between STA and the Assembly Local Government staff that went into print last week. So I would expect to see that bill set for hearing at some point in the relatively near future. There will be, so we're in the second week of April. The deadline for policy committees is May 2nd. Spring recess is next week. So there's going to be a very busy 2 weeks in the second half of April. So I would anticipate that bill would likely be heard the third week of April in local government, and then the last Monday, April 29th, in Assembly Transportation.
Can you talk about what's in the bill?
Yeah, so what the bill does in its current form, because the amendments that were crossed by the local government committee do change it quite a bit. I would say 3 core things. So first, it allows STA to put a revenue measure on the ballot for a sub-regional portion of Sacramento County. And so folks from this region will be familiar with the measure that allowed Placer County to do that with kind of the southwestern corner. Unfortunately, that measure just barely missed the 2/3 mark last election. The other piece is really important to, I think, SACOG's SCS implementation, and that's really creating some flexibility in the expenditure plan to allow the tax revenues to support infill infrastructure that helps achieve the greenhouse gas reductions in the sustainable community strategy. So that is a unique provision. We haven't seen that yet in the local transportation authority laws, but I think with this Assembly Transportation Chair and this Assembly Local Government Chair, I think they really understand the linkage between housing affordability and meeting our climate goals and having a transportation system that's efficient and well used, right? And then finally, there's been some conversations around tolling related language. And I think there's some disagreement perhaps on the need for current language, but I think that the Assembly Transportation Committee is also taking a close look at that and having conversations about what in fact is it that STA's role in tolling would be in the future. And does that require something in this bill, or does that require changes to the existing law that gives the California Transportation Commission the authority, basically delegated authority, to approve the creation of tolling authorities and to create toll facilities on state highways? So lots of discussions on that, but again, in a pretty compressed time period here in the second half of April, and would expect to see that bill moving forward.
So if I could just comment on that. What I find troubling about this is we're loaning CARTA money, and SACOG would like to be their own toll authority, or not SACOG, STA would like to be their own tolling authority. That is really troubling for me. There are a number of things in this bill that are, I mean, I just think they're outrageous. He needs to stay in his lane. He needs to administer Measure A funds. That's what they were created for. And he's getting way out of his lane with this. So I encourage everyone to take a look at this bill. It's pretty outrageous if I look at it. So thank you very much, Chris.
Director Shaper, I do just want to say we're having very good conversations with STA, and so we're working on a lot of the things that you've raised.
But I've met with our elected officials, and they say this is moving pretty quickly. So I'm a little concerned that this is moving a little faster than we like. That's all. And by the way, I'm more concerned about this body and the value that I see in this body, because this cuts people that are out of Sacramento County out of it. And the first version of this, that as I understand it, he essentially wanted to be his own MPO. And that's just, like I said, I think somebody needs to rein him in. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just get clarification, you say someone needs to, okay, that's what I wasn't sure. We can talk offline, but I don't think that the appetite for STA to be its own toll authority is quite as far down the road as you might think it is. Okay.
All right, thank you. Did you had some additional questions? Dr.
Oh, when we get to the informational hearing on the declining gas tax revenues, Madam Chair. that's what
Oh,
I was
okay.
Alluding to. I didn't know if that was going to be discussed or not.
Happy to discuss some of the other items in the report if there's time.
Yeah, Director Soon, you're talking about the joint hearing in the legislature?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just a quick update. I testified at that along with a couple of other colleagues like Tanisha Taylor from CTC. The legislature had a hearing on the future of gas tax revenues. So gas tax revenues are declining quickly. And then the conversation, not just in the state of California, but other states, is a possible switch away from a tax on gasoline to some other kind of a fee, right? And so the fee that mostly people are talking about is a per mile traveled fee. So, I think it was a pretty interesting hearing. There was good attendance from state legislators. The longer the state waits, and this actually completely relates to the blueprint because we're assuming certain things about future state revenue. The longer the state waits to do something, and if it's going to be revenue neutral, and the further down that curve we are, the less revenue we have if it's going to be revenue neutral. So that was pretty much it. We're happy to give you a fuller report or answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, James. That is my concern, right? And I just don't know when is appropriate for for this body and then the broader SACOG board to weigh in.
Sure.
It is something I'm wrestling with, and I know I may be oversimplifying. I think you've heard me say this before, and I don't know what you testified to, so please excuse me if I contradict what you said or anything, but the amount of administration required to monitor vehicle miles traveled is enormous, like, and ongoing. And so I go back to why would we not, examine a type of a vehicle registration fee program per driver, right? And if you drive less, then, you maybe you're paying more per fee, or however you want to measure it. But if you're driving a lot more, you're getting a deal. The bottom line is you get more people into the system. It's consistent. It's predictable, right? If you do vehicle miles traveled, I don't know if I change jobs, which I have. So my miles might change up or down at any given time, any given month. So again, the amount of personnel and effort to try to manage human behavior for, 20 million drivers, I'm just estimating here, but is so hard. And so then getting back to the timing it takes to implement something, and we're going farther and farther down the path of having something in place. Those are all those things that cause me concern. So I guess I'd maybe I ask you, is there a good time when at least maybe us as a board could weigh in on this?
Absolutely.
Like a discussionary item on an upcoming agenda might be
Yeah.
prudent.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. And I know, Chair Soon, there was a good discussion at the Land Use Committee on Thursday afternoon, maybe not so much in the administration aspects of it, but just generally speaking. So, and this committee, this is a very appropriate topic for you all to tackle. So why don't we'll work with you to figure out an appropriate time to bring it back and give you a fuller presentation.
Great, thank you.
It would be great to have some ideas and then, the pros and cons of each, because you're right. The traveled is just such an administrative heavy burden, really. And so, thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair, I can talk a little bit about process on AB 1421 if you'd like. And then also I just have to, point of personal privilege, give James kudos for answering a lot of wild off-topic questions, right? He was there to testify.
Not today.
Right.
Thank you for clarifying.
That's true. At the hearing, he was there to testify. What are the impacts to SACOG's program and this region about the deterioration of gas tax revenue as the fleet electrifies, and really definitely handled a lot of other questions that were not the topic of the hearing, and I think made the region look good. But AB 1421 is Assemblymember Wilson, Transportation Committee Chair's vehicle to kind of facilitate a broader conversation around this issue. We are not anticipating a very quick movement towards amending that bill into like a substantive tax measure. What it does right now is just reauthorizes the state's road user charge technical advisory committee. And what the chair intends to do is have convenings around the state to really dig into the issues that you identified, Director. So I think there's lots of opportunities there. And while I think the stakeholders, particularly Transportation California, are really trying to just get the conversation moving, it's not a situation where the train's already left the station and we're falling behind. I think the transportation chair takes it very seriously, the idea that we want to build consensus around potential options for the future. So
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Any other updates on this item? None? All right. And any further public comment?
There's no public comment.
All right. Seeing none, let's move on to the next item, information item 6. And thank you very much for the update. Mega Region Working Group Summary. Dustin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Directors. Again, Dustin Foster. I'm a planner on the transportation team here, and I also staff the Mega Region. So today I'll be providing a brief verbal report out on the first working group meeting of the year. Our chair attended as one of our representatives. Actually, Director Schaefer is our newly appointed representative, so good
Yay.
job to you there, yeah. All right, so great. So the Mega Region Working Group totals 12 elected officials, 4 each representing the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, in the Bay Area, the San Joaquin Council of Governments, and SACOG. This has been a partnership since a 2020 MOU established the group. And together, our 3 agencies are tackling how people and goods move throughout the 16-county Northern California mega region. We rotate chair and vice chair every year. So this year, MTC is chairing and SACOG is vice chairing. So next year we'll be chairing and leading kind of those meetings. So very exciting. Our major work includes holding up to 3 meetings a year. We have held 2 joint advocacy days here in Sacramento, really explaining the work that we do together and really supporting grant requests for 12 projects throughout the region. They're the Mega Region Dozen list. And I will note the brochure here is being updated, so I'll have one in time for Cap to Cap with all the latest info. So that's really good. So the first Mega Region Working Group was held Friday, January 26th. Oh, excuse me, that was March. Sorry. And so SACOG's 4 representatives to the Mega Region, again, Alice Dowden-Calvillo, Director Kozlowski, Director Schaefer, and Director Bradford, who is vice chair this year. So MTC appointed 3 new representatives and elected Nate Miley to the chair position, and SJCOG has newly appointed Mayor Dan Ariola from the city of Tracy. So the agenda topics, I'll be brief covering those in case directors want to say anything about that. So the agenda topics began with MTC Executive Director Andrew Vermeer providing an introduction and history of the working group, answering some good questions for some of the newer members, new representatives. And then as we do in every meeting, staff from the 3 agencies provide updates on our 4 mega region project priorities. So I was able to provide an update on SACOG's 4 priorities, which are the I-80 and US 50 YOLO managed lanes, which at this point, we're working on phase 1 over the YOLO Causeway, developing the first toll lanes in the region. The Valley Rail program, which is extending ACE and Amtrak San Joaquin service into Sacramento and eventually up to Chico. They're doing some planning work on that aspect. And then I-5 Sacramento managed lanes, developing managed lanes from US 50 past the airport to the Yolo County line. And then finally, the Capital Corridor, Sacramento to Roseville, 3rd track. So the focus of the meeting was on state policy, covering a lot of topics actually that Chris just went over, my colleague. So that's good. We invited Sabrina Bradbury, Deputy Director of California Association of Councils of Government, CalCog, to discuss the latest on SB 375 reform, and then discussion around the cap and trade extension. So the next 2 meetings are scheduled for June 20th and September 26th, and we are eyeing a potential advocacy day in the fall. So instead of holding it kind of around the spring, around this time, we're planning to have that in the fall. I'll stop there. I'll hand it back to the chair for any comments, questions. At your discretion, I can provide more detail on the discussion topics, the project updates for the Mega Region Dozen, and any key insights learned from Sabrina's presentation. Back to you, Chair.
Very good summary of our meeting. Appreciate that very much. Are there any questions or comments at this time? Hearing none, any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
All right, hearing no public comments. Thank you very much again for the update, and we'll move on to the next item, which is the transit representation on metropolitan planning organizations and governments update on the MOU. And Christina, this is yours.
And actually, I'm going to take this for Christina today.
Oh.
So good morning again. So this is a requirement that the federal government has for MPOs like SACOG across the country to determine a method for how transit is included in the decision-making process on your board. And the way that SACOG has done this since 2016 is we pass an annual resolution identifying and just reminding all of you of who on this board sits on a transit agency board in another capacity. So the item before you today is simply just an informational one. It came to the Transportation Committee on Thursday last week. It'll go to the full board next week to just make this annual adoption. I do want to note, though, that there's also a parallel process that's happening. There's an MOU that is also a federal requirement that SACOG at a regional scale gets together with all the transit agencies and agrees on how the planning and programming functions are carried out in a joint manner. And we're having our first meeting with all the transit operator executives this Thursday to start that process. And we'll be bringing back updates to the board as we hope to get a full MOU agreed to among all the transit operators in SACOG this calendar year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So just to reiterate, this is an informational item to us, but this will go before the board for a formal adoption.
Correct. It was
We're not taking any action
unanimously-
today.
Right, unanimously recommended out of transportation on Thursday.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Questions or comments?
Just a quick
Yes.
comment. Thank you. I just glad to see that the conversations are going between all the transit agencies and look forward to positive outcomes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to our final informational item. This is from Plan to Action, implementing the 2025 blueprint. Clint, this is yours.
Thank you very much. Just got a quick presentation and then time for questions or input that'll inform our policies for the 2025 blueprint plan. So these are just a handful of discussion questions. These are also in your staff report to just keep in mind as I'm going through this presentation and you're giving any input or direction on the policies. So briefly, just a bit of background on what these policies are. Coming out of last year, the board adopted a pretty ambitious set of land use assumptions and transportation investments for the 2025 blueprint. We need to marry those up with some policies to support implementation of the plan outcomes. So what these policies do, as it says here, really support consistent actions across all kind of players on the regional field. So local agencies, SACOG, State of California, Caltrans, transit agencies. And while these policies, and it's not a regulatory document, so there's very few shalls in this document, this is much more about encouragement, prioritizing, providing technical assistance. And so the verbs that you see in these policies are much more along those lines, and so SACOG does lean in on those, but they are not solely for SACOG to enact. These are things that absolutely depend on players from across the region. And then SACOG will lean in to support the implementation. They do not supplant or supersede local policies in your general plans, your other planning documents, or your policies or authorities. These do not override any of those plans. One of the very first things that we had the board, or we asked the board to do when we started this update was to adopt an overarching policy theme for this plan. And that kind of shapes all of the different analyses and discussions that we've brought to the board over the last handful of years working on this plan. So the triple bottom line, advancing goals for equity, economy, and environment co-equally. We also took an additional almost 2 years on this plan. We got state legislation for a handful of reasons. Some of that you heard in the previous presentation. We're talking about 375 and SB1 and how we can reform these to work better. But the other thing that we did with the additional time that we've taken on this plan is do a lot more outreach to residents around the region. We hit over 6,000 people in this outreach. And these are the themes that emerged that we heard from communities across the region. I'll just highlight a couple of them. Housing was the #1 topic. Housing affordability was the #1 concern that residents had. And it was some of the nuance of that concern was really about providing housing at all life stages. So from your first apartment to your first house, to where you want to raise your kids, to maybe in retirement, once your kids are gone, you might be looking for something new. And having enough options that are affordable for all those different life phases was really important to residents, as well as preparing for natural disasters to protect people, to protect property. And then safety was a really big theme in this cycle. And that is safety while driving your car, walking, biking, but it's also safety while waiting at a transit stop or feeling safe while riding a transit vehicle. So what are we planning for? We're about a 2.5 million person region today, growing by a little less than 25% to about 3.1 million people by 2050. To accommodate all those new people, 278,000 new homes and 263,000 jobs. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the strategy behind where all those people and jobs and homes are going. But each of these plan updates is a chance to iterate, refine, and build on the prior plan update. These are a living document we updated every 4 years. And so these were the 4 strategic priorities out of the prior plan. These also became the strategic priorities in SACOG's strategic plan that was adopted by the board in 2022. And these would remain as kind of the priority areas that our policies for this plan are built under. So priority 1, building vibrant and inclusive places. I won't read all of this, but really this is where kind of our more housing and land use focused policies and engaging with people live. One of the key strategies in this plan is that we are growing where we already have kind of existing built environment. We're building within the kind of existing urbanized footprint. So that's putting more housing, more jobs, more people in our centers and corridors, in established communities. About 68% of all the growth in the plan goes into those areas. That's consistent where we've seen growth in the past. However, the centers and corridors, so main streets, aging commercial corridors, places like that, we know are lagging. They have bigger barriers to overcome. Some of those really big barriers are infrastructure, the under the ground stuff, your water, your drainage, your sewer, as well as regulation that holds up the infill development that is planned for those areas. So one way you'll see this plan kind of move from plan to action is this is one of the draft policies to identify a more stable funding source for Green Means Go. We've got about $60 million out now in planning and infrastructure grants, but that's just a drop in the bucket compared to where we need to go. And so identifying and securing stable sources of funding for that program are of paramount importance. We also have in this plan ambitions to drive a lot more housing diversity. So seeing more attached products, more single lot, small lot, single family products, as well as continued construction of larger lot homes. And Green Means Go is also about trying to diversify our housing portfolio. And there's other policies in the plan to that end as well, including suggestions and technical assistance for sharing best practices in local regulation or regulatory form across jurisdictions in the region. Priority 2, fostering next generation of mobility solutions. We know there's not enough money in this plan to do everything that we want to from a capital standpoint or from an operating and maintenance standpoint. And so we've got to be very clever and creative in kind of the approaches that we're taking to provide mobility options to folks. One of the pieces of input we received from the Land Use Committee during this is in our prior plan, we had ambitions to spread more of our micromobility bike and scooter share across larger swaths of the region. That's had mixed success. We also had a large pandemic, but the input we got from Land Use Committee is to really be context sensitive about the technologies and the solutions we're rolling out across the region, because not every place is the same. So where bike and scooter share might work well in a downtown Davis or a downtown Sacramento, maybe things like a more on-demand bus service like the Beeline out to Winters would work there. And so this is really about being creative to find solutions that work in the variety of contexts we have throughout the region. Modernizing the way we pay for transportation. This came up in your previous conversations. The last plan was the first plan in this region to introduce tolling and pricing as one of our strategies for the plan, as well as a move over to a more user pays system or a road usage pays system away from a fuel tax. So in the last plan, we had a policy to establish a new tolling authority. And that has now happened. We have CARTA in place. And so you're seeing the policies kind of move from establish this authority to now let's really work and partner with CARTA and local agencies and Caltrans to develop a network of toll lanes, which we did not have when we entered the development of the last plan. And so this is just an example of how these policies and these plans build on each other. Priority 4, build and maintain a safe and equitable resilient transportation system. We know one of our biggest needs in this region is for state of good repair, for maintenance. We're about $400 to $500 million a year short region-wide on paying for these things. Just coming out of I believe, 2-year effort to revamp the regional funding programs that SACOG runs. We've reprioritized our our state funding program to be much more about investing in maintenance and in the existing system. And that has already happened, but this plan is kind of taking that and putting it into policy. So this is just another example of how these plans are living documents. You are implementing as you're building the plan. But this plan does suggest moving more of those flexible funding sources as we're able into maintaining our system, into investing in the existing transportation system, as well as supporting bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure investments, investing in the regional trails network, which is looking to connect the communities across the region with more than 1,000 miles of trail. And so these are all policies that hopefully we would be able to work into grant applications when we're going after federal and state funds. They're designed to kind of speak in the language of federal and state government. And so these are, I said, not something that SACOG takes to the finish line by ourselves, but we work a lot with our local agencies and partners to do this. And so pulling these policies out and pulling strategies directly from the plan are a really good way to show that this grant application for this sidewalk gap closure, this complete street, or the safe routes to school are really part of a larger vision that is moving a number of both regional, local, and state federal priorities forward. Before I open it up to questions, I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of where we're at now. So this month, we're getting final policy review and input from all of the committees. We're writing the draft plan and the accompanying EIR right now, and we expect to bring those to the board next month in May to release for 2 months of public review. We'll come back in the fall just with what we heard during that public review, how we're modifying the plan and responding to those comments, with then coming back to the board hopefully in November to ask for adoption of this plan. And then we would be off to submitting the plan to federal and state partners and to the Air Resources Board for final approval. And these are those discussion questions that we started the presentation with. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or input.
Thank you very much for the update. I appreciate it. Committee members, questions, comments on this item? Staff are looking for some input, so this is our opportunity. Oh, you did such a great job.
Yeah.
Drafting language. Yes.
Yeah, just I just wanted to emphasize that, Clint, you and James and the entire team. I mean, this process has been so long in the making. It's repetitive. It's not your first go around, but a lot of us new on the board or the outreach to communities. I think there's been so many conversations from so many different parties, and so I still remember when we learned about all the different stakeholder groups outside of our jurisdictions that you're outreaching to, and so really appreciate your work engaging with those folks and getting us to this point.
And Chair Soon and Chair Down, I'm sorry I had to step away, so maybe I'm repeating Clint. But a couple of things, we're out right now, touring all the boards and councils, went to EDCTC last week. We will go to every single jurisdiction. And that we did that 2 years ago to kick this off, 2.5 years ago. We'll do it again. We don't have to do that. That's just part of, I think we've learned a lot and we've heard a lot. And so the question here is, how do we then translate all of this into beyond just a plan? How do we actually implement this, right? And there's things that SACOG can do, but honestly, this is a team effort. So I think partly you'll hear or you'll read even some of these policies are written kind of like SACOG will encourage this, will promote this, but when we get to the final plan, I think we'd like a little bit more of a shared, this is us together as a region. And the second thing is, for the first time, we're going to have every single jurisdiction, city and county show up in the plan in a profile. What are your local priorities that achieve the regional goals, right? So that, and every jurisdiction has a different set of those priorities, right? But adding up, that adds up to the regional vision. So anyway, just to build on your point.
Yeah, and if I could also emphasize, I mean, that's part of the stakeholder groups was outreaching to our local building industry association. And it's amazing because many of us have been kind of through this process before. At least we're aware of this update all the time. And I feel like recently people, people meaning, you know, the business community and others are recognizing what you said in here, Clint, that we all have our own respective general plans. This is a ongoing update, and our work doesn't preclude our individual jurisdictions from doing theirs, right? Their work. So, but again, it's bringing all of us together for a greater, grander vision for equity, economy, and the environment that will better the entire region. So, and I want to thank you, James, I think you came to Elk Grove last. I don't know if you did another one since then, but we saw you last week or a couple weeks ago too. Appreciate you being there. So again, thank you.
And I think that is a valid point, and I know we talked about that before, but that each of us have our own general plans, and many of us are actually going through the general amendment process. I know the city of Auburn is. And so things are in flux for us, but we are moving towards that. You know, it's quite a lengthy process, but do appreciate that piece. There are 3 discussion questions. I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to take a look at those and you know, if we think we're still going down the correct path, that's great. But I'll just again ask if there's any further questions or yes, Dr. Gallego.
I'll be loud. I really do think that these visits coming. Thank you. These visits coming to our jurisdictions are really helpful. I don't know about everybody else. We have like, 2 minutes in our board reports to say, hey, here's what's happening on mosquito vector, SACOG, art. And so you really only give a really brief overview. So having you come, I think it really is helpful. And as Chair Soon mentioned, we have our own plans. How does this work in there? So we're looking forward. I think you guys are coming to ours on Tuesday, but I do think it's very, very helpful and gets more into the depth that the rest of my council is looking for. So thank you.
You did a great job in Auburn a month ago or so. Thank you. All right, any further questions or comments? We do have one public comment. So with that said, I'll go ahead and invite David Schwegel to come on up and give your public comment, please.
Thank you. David Schwegel. So our region is the second most overlooked region in the nation behind Madison, Wisconsin, according to the American Business Journals. I was actually part of the Precision Civil Engineering team. We were the regional consultant on Merced to Sacramento. We took a taxpayer-centered approach and had just a $1 million contract. We followed AECOM that took a profit-centered approach with a $7.5 million contract. They drew a bunch of lines on the map showing numerous property impacts, as well as wiping out new housing, miles of new housing in Manteca and Galt. While at Precision Civil Engineering, we noticed there was very evident discrimination against small businesses. The gal that we reported to at the High Speed Rail Authority didn't like me at all because I put her in a position where she got grilled by Barry Broom when Barry Broom realized that Sacramento was a rock bottom priority in the whole process. One of our functions at Precision Civil Engineering was conducting an analysis of public comment at every board of directors meeting, including one in Los Angeles that had 142 public comments, almost all opposed to the project. When they asked me what's the takeaway from LA, I said, we do not want Elk Grove to become another Santa Clarita. So Elk Grove is a game changer, and I'm advocating aggressively for a station in Elk Grove for high-speed rail, even though it doesn't show up on the high-speed rail map right now. Once I learned that Sacramento is by far the rock bottom priority on the entire high-speed rail project, and specifically the Merced to Sacramento section, even though it is the quickest, most direct pathway to ridership revenue needed to construct over the mountains into the LA basin and in the Silicon Valley. I testified at every single SACOG board of directors meeting for that full year between once the contract ended to when I moved down to Central California to serve as change order manager on the high-speed rail construction package 2. Finally, in conclusion, and again, Precision Civil Engineering only had a $1 million contract as opposed to the $7.5 million. Not only did we write the Connected Corridor study, but our public outreach effort was so effective that there was more stakeholder support on Merced to Sacramento than any other project section, and that stakeholder support was evident at the February 2020 High-Speed Rail Board of Directors meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, seeing that there's no further discussion on this item, we'll move from it. Thank you very much to staff for the presentation. Other matters? I don't believe there's any further business before us. Yes.
I just want to, for the record, go very staunchly on the record that Mac Road is actually very safe, and I encourage everybody to utilize our shops and restaurants down the Mac Road corridor, regardless of what's been said this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, unless there's any objection, I'll adjourn today's meeting. Hearing none, that shall be the order. Thank you, everyone.